Surging consumer prices and higher operating costs for businesses are among the outcomes predicted by a new state report on proposed Trump administration import taxes. Florida TaxWatch is a nonpartisan nonprofit government watchdog that has researched tax issues in the state for 45 years. Joining us by phone to tell us about the new findings is Jui Shah. She's a research economist at Florida TaxWatch and author of the new report. Good morning, Jui. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, this report is called The Potential Impacts of New Tariffs on Florida's Economy. And we know that there has been
Mhm.
a lot of confusion surrounding these tariffs, in some cases, more confusion than comprehension. But you're trying to look at how this will impact Florida consumers, Florida businesses, and really the overall economy of the state. What is the takeaway there?
So, Florida is the 10th largest importer in the U.S. We imported a value of about 117 billion in 2024, and even in January 2025, Florida exported goods worth 6.1 billion and imported goods worth 10 billion. So we're importing more than we're exporting, and it mostly comes from industries that are from the vehicle manufacturing, electronic industries, and the industrial machineries, which means that we lack the facilities right now to kind of make those goods from Florida. So importing goods will probably raise costs more when tariffs are imposed. Right now, they're on a halt till August 1st, as we all know.
Right. And one particularly eye catching finding of this report is that grocery bills could increase by 10 to 15% if these new tariffs are imposed. And that is on top of a 25% increase that Florida has seen since the start of the pandemic, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we're talking about a really significant, potentially significant impact on people's pocketbooks.
Yeah. So Florida is already one of the highest states that pays like more for their groceries, and seeing an impose on tariffs, it's just because we also import a lot of um, kinds of seafood, fruits, nuts. So seeing that as though families use those in their regular grocery bills, weekly bills will um, most probably go up 10 to 15%. That's from a study that the Capitol Hill did.
So are these increased costs unavoidable? I mean, we know that there's this pullback, sort of a moniker that's been applied to the path of these tariffs is TACO, which is stands for Trump always chickens out. It's kind of a term coined by a reporter, but basically indicating that there's this, declaration that there's going to be these tariffs and then there are delays in their imposition. But it does seem that certainly we know some have been imposed and others seem to be really moving forward.
Yeah, so it's more of a negotiating game that President Trump is playing, which most countries tend to do because a lot of countries do impose tariffs on American products that haven't been reduced in many years. So what we're trying to do is kind of level the playing field and increase also our value in the international trade market and try to boost American domestic manufacturing so that in the long term we can have products that are already made within the country so we don't have to depend on other countries for the value of our products being sold to consumers.
And so for a state like Florida, where you say, we really are import heavy and we don't have that manufacturing base,
Mhm.
how what it would be the forecast for those tariffs having that kind of impact in Florida, or at least on what timeline?
It really depends on when those trade negotiations are finished. But I think in the short term, what we've seen in research is that in the short term, prices will most definitely increase because we'll see a lot of imports, for example, in the construction industry, where we depend on a lot for raw materials from Mexico or Canada. And before we can start manufacturing those products and raw materials in Florida, we're still going to have to depend on these countries for importing the raw materials. So if cost of production goes up for the businesses, in order to maintain a profit margin, those costs are also burdened on the consumers as well as the businesses. It's not just the consumers that pay for these tariffs.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about the financial impacts Floridians can expect from Trump administration import taxes. You can join the conversation by calling 904 549 2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. Um, Jui, this report is based on U.S. Imposed tariffs or proposed tariffs, I should say, um, not necessarily on retaliatory tariffs, I guess. And can you kind of
Yeah.
explain, um, first of all, how you're deciding what set of facts to apply to your analysis in an environment where the numbers seem to be changing day by day, practically?
Yeah. So there are a lot of institutions that do studies like the Tax Foundation and then the budget model at Yale and the budget model at Penn Wharton that consistently try to calculate what kind of costs will be borne by consumers on a number of tariffs. Right now, we can see that there is a pause on the tariffs, which hopefully trade negotiations will come to an end on August 1st, and we'll see something kind of definite more to go towards. But tariffs can also bring a revenue to the national economy and also the state economy. And we have seen that in the past month. I believe that we've been in a budget surplus federally, which not a lot of people saw coming. But we kind of decided to stick to just proposed imposing tariffs that America is going to do on other countries because reciprocal tariffs can be seen in the future. While negotiations are going on, one country might say, okay, if you do this, we're going to place a 10% tariff on American products. But then we go back with another number that let's come somewhere in the middle where we can kind of have the same playing field for both countries and both of the countries can make a good process of it.
Right, but I mean, even the tariffs that have been proposed appear to change, you know, frequently, and we know that this report that you issued came out the same week that the president announced a 25% tax on Japan and South Korean imports just this weekend. Despite a lot of negotiations that have been happening with Mexico and the European Union, he announced
Mhm.
30% tariffs and 50% tariffs on Brazil just sort of out of a political peak. So, when you're making these calculations, are you saying, yeah, that this is the moment in time that they immortalize? And kind of when is that? Has that changed since the report came out?
Um, I'm sure some of the calculations would have definitely changed after the report came out because this report kind of focuses mainly on the 10% tariffs that are proposed to be on almost all the countries worldwide. So the calculations from this report are only on those tariffs, on the 10% universal tariffs that we're planning to impose.
I see. So if this is based on the 10% universal tariff, what could we expect if these more dramatic tariffs take effect? Is everything in your report just amplified, or do the findings change?
It kind of goes both ways because when those tariffs are imposed, we also make a revenue out of them federally. So our federal revenue can also go up because of those imposed tariffs. But in the short term, I think that definitely the costs borne by both businesses and consumers would go up.
So I know that, there were very dire predictions initially when these were announced, and everybody was saying that inflation was going to go up. I think that
Hmm.
that has happened to a lesser degree than people were predicting or fearing. And the administration has sort of claimed that that's, a measure of the fact that these costs are ultimately going to be borne by somebody other than consumers, that the nations that are exporting these goods are going to bear those costs, or the middlemen are going to absorb them somehow. What do you think about the pace of inflation and, whether that is an eventuality that is certain or whether maybe that just won't happen?
Looking at the trend right now, inflation has been pretty steady. It hasn't gone up like a lot of people, like you said, have had predicted. But with that, we can always compare, production pricing or personal purchasing power, what kind of all income level, people at all income levels will probably feel these effects. But that would be in the short term. Like I said, it wouldn't, I don't think that in the long term we'll see that much of a hike in inflation in the coming months, just because there's still so many negotiations going on. It's still very uncertain in the national, broader economic outlook And I think before any actual calculation can be made, we have to wait for, final decisions on trade negotiations.
It seems too that among economists, there's question about what price increases or decreases might actually signify. For instance, the cost of eggs or airfares, have seen actually some
Mhm.
measurable decline. But some are saying that that might actually be a sign of a weakening economy as opposed to just a relief from inflation. Can you explain kind of what those two things might indicate?
Yeah, so whenever inflation goes up, we see federal rates trying to mobilize that inflation. And mobilizing federal rates is always a little tough to anticipate what effect that can have. Now, that can have an effect of weakening the economy, or it can have an effect of kind of boosting savings in the US, which can lead to, in the longer term, people spending more after a few months or maybe next year when employment is also higher and inflation is lower, and people are going to start spending their money again.
So we know
So
that
it
there.
kind of
Oh,
can go,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Go ahead, Julie. Go
No,
ahead.
sorry. I was just saying it can possibly go both ways, but trying to anticipate it kind of also depends on how the federal rates are controlled.
And this is a statewide study that Florida TaxWatch did, obviously, but I'm just curious if there are regional anomalies that we should be thinking about. I know that here, the University of North Florida's Jacksonville Economic Monitoring Survey, which does, these kind of analysis frequently, if not monthly, they
Mhm.
have found contraction in virtually every sector when it comes to, key indicators that they track, whether it's production output or new orders or work backlogs, and even employment. And so this is now the fifth straight month of local manufacturing contraction. Do we
Mhm.
know how the trends that you're forecasting based on these tariffs could impact different regions differently?
Um, I did not say that much on the regional level, but I can say that definitely it can make a difference regionally because a lot of for example, the citrus industry in Florida is based regionally more in Central Florida than it is anywhere else. Now, the citrus industry is already struggling a little bit since the past few years. With reciprocal tariffs possibly in place from places like Canada and Mexico, where we export our orange juice, where we export our oranges, that will have likely a negative impact on the citrus industry more than it already is having. So that would affect the Central Florida region more than it would affect North Florida or South Florida. Same with the tourism industry in South Florida and parts of the IT industry that we see towards Tampa. So it can go industry wise based on where those industries are focused in Florida. But on what level, I am not sure at this point.
Yeah, and it's surprising to see. I mean, you say that there are industries that are going to be more heavily impacted, and your report specifically
Mhm.
highlights construction, car, purchases, automotive dealerships, and then a couple that surprised me. One was fish, seafood, which you think
Yeah.
of, on this peninsula and with all of our waterways that we would be exporting more than we're importing, but in fact, we are really heavily dependent on seafood imports.
Yeah, we are in the fisheries industry just because we have so much demand. People in Florida love fishing, love eating fish. Seafood is very popular here. Just to maintain that demand and supply, we do have to import a lot of our seafood products as well.
Well, it is a very interesting report, timely and helpful. And we thank you so much for coming on to talk about it. This is a report that's available if you want to look it up at FloridaTaxWatch.org. And we're talking to the author of the report, Jui Shah. Thank you, Jui. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
All right.